Hello everyone, and welcome to Soft Stories. I'm Stratton, and today we are going to continue our reading of Silas Hocking's Real Grit. When last we left our hero, Jack Formby, he was making a bit of a name for himself. Not only was he a contractor for the railroad in his own right, but he was becoming a bit of a spiritual figure in his community as well, helping not only to build pathways through the land, but also, at least in the words of the author, to heaven. And that is where we left Jack after a close accident, a near miss, but a survival and a man returning from the brink of despair. But let us see what happens next. In chapter 28, To the Rescue. During the winter or early spring, the camp was removed across the hills to another valley, nearly 4 miles away. It was not equal for situation to Fernbeck Vale, the ground being wet and boggy, while the district was even more thinly populated than the one they had left. But they were once more close to their work, and that atoned for any disadvantage in point of situation or lack of natural beauty. Jack, having completed his contract and done well by it in every sense, had launched out in a still larger undertaking, chiefly through the advice and assistance of Tom Lashton. Instead of 30 men, he had now over 200 in his employ, and was generally regarded as a wonderfully capable and successful man. Scarcely had the hot weather commenced, however, than 2 or 3 men in the camp were smitten down almost simultaneously with typhoid fever, and in a few weeks the dread disease had begun epidemic. In a very short time there was a general exodus from the wooden village. Many of the men seemed horror-stricken, and positively refused to enter the camp again as soon as they had discovered the true nature of the disease. As a consequence, the sick in some instances were left to suffer and die alone, without a single friend to smooth their fevered pillow, or cheer with a word of hope their pathway to the grave. 2 doctors rode over from Bradfield every day, and 3 or 4 nurses had heroically volunteered their services to assist the fever-stricken and dying men. But as the epidemic steadily increased, their services proved sadly inefficient, while they, the nurses, were in danger of failing altogether through sheer exhaustion and fatigue. The doctors did what they could to get other nurses to come, but the task was not an easy one. A navvy encampment is a place that people do not care to enter, especially when smitten with fell disease. And women who had been used to hospital work shrank from coming unprotected into such a place. A few, however, resolutely put every other feeling aside than that of common humanity, and bravely faced the danger. And more than one crowned her heroism with her life, and was laid to sleep in a martyr's grave. Jack was lodging at a farmhouse 2 miles away from the works, but as soon as he learned the true state of affairs, he called his gangers, of whom Nick Whiffle was one. "Look here, men," he said. "Our brethren are dying, uncared for and untended. I am going to the rescue. I may fall, God only knows. It won't matter much if I do, for I am alone in the world. But my duty is clear. I have learned it from the book as I have read it to you Sunday by Sunday. Do the best you can with the work, and make an honest job of it, whatever the cost. If I die, I shouldn't like it said when I'm in my grave that I scamped my work." "Never fear," was the answer. "Everything shall be attended to as if you were on the spot." "But I'd like to be excused," said Nick Whiffle quite abruptly. "Excused?" said Jack in astonishment. "Aye, I'd like you to put another man in as ganger, and let me go with you." "Could you nurse the sick?" said Jack. "I'd try any road," said the giant. "Then you shall come," said Jack, and he turned away his head to hide the tears that came suddenly to his eyes. Nick was ready to follow Jack to the world's end, if needs be, and nothing pleased him better than to be allowed to stand by his master's side in any danger or difficulty. The camp had a sadly deserted appearance. Many of the late occupants had erected tents and rude shanties here and there on the hillsides. Some were sleeping at nights in outhouses, and some in the open air. Yet a great many stayed, some out of mere bravado, others in the belief that they would be as safe there as elsewhere, so long as they did not go into the cabins where the fever-stricken lay. And one or two more true-hearted than the rest remained to nurse a brother or a friend. Jack's presence was everywhere hailed with expressions of wonder and delight, and rude men who had abused and insulted him when he had first came into their midst 3 years ago, now kissed his hand and bedewed it with their tears as he ministered to their wants. Nor was Nick Whiffle's presence much less a surprise. He followed Jack everywhere, and did everything he was told to do. From cabin to cabin they passed, with quick but silent footsteps, and had they been 2 angels from heaven, their presence could not have been more welcome. Both were strong, and could easily lift the helpless navvies in their arms, while the nurses made their beds. Hence their assistance was invaluable. Many of the poor fellows were delirious, and raved and blasphemed in the most shocking manner. Some pathetically called for wife or children that they had left in towns or villages far away. Others were moaning and writhing in the last agony. To one and all, Jack's presence acted like a charm. He had always been a sweet and gentle influence among them. He had known better days, all knew that now. Yet he was ever a man amongst them, putting on no airs, and claiming no superiority. As a consequence, he had easily overcome their prejudices, and early won their confidence and affection. And now, at the risk of his own life, he had come amongst them, daring the danger that he might do them good. Such conduct penetrated the hard crust of their natures as nothing else could, and filled them with wonder and admiration. The fever proved a very malignant type, and as a consequence, nearly 2/3 of those who were attacked died. Some passed away gently, as though asleep, while others, conscious to the last, writhed in terrible agony, and piteously prayed that they might be released from their sufferings. When Jack had a little time at his disposal, he sat by their bedsides and read to them out of the old book, which had become very precious to him in those days. And sometimes he knelt upon the floor and offered up a simple prayer, that the good God would look down upon them with pitying eye, and in his mercy spare them. And while he read and prayed, the tears would come into the sufferers' eyes and roll silently down their cheeks. It made them think of other and happier days, and brought to their recollection memories of their childhood and youth. Often he found them writhing in pain, and left them with a smile of sweet content upon their weather-beaten faces. And the giant at his side would look on and wonder. Nick's affection for Jack almost amounted to reverence, and to serve him was a constant joy. As the days passed, and lengthened into weeks, the anxiety and loss of sleep began to tell upon both, but they made no complaint, and never relaxed their efforts. Sometimes they sat together for a few minutes out in the open air, in the cool of the evening, but it was very rarely that many words passed between them. Yet it was very sweet to drink in the sweet breath of evening, and listen to the song of the lark, high up in the cloudless sky, all unconscious of pain or sorrow. The district was not beautiful, as we have said, though sometimes the sunsets were glorious. The rich and changing colours of the sky, baffling all description, and after the sight of the blanched and suffering faces of the stricken navvies, and the stifling atmosphere of their narrow rooms, it was a joy to gaze on the sunset sky and breathe the pure breath of heaven. On one of the hottest days of the season, 3 of their comrades had been buried. They had only died on the previous evening, but such an epidemic as this would brook no delay. The sooner the grave closed over the dead, the better for the living. Jack felt in a very sober mood as he sat alone for a few minutes in the sunset glow. He knew not but that he might be the next to fall, and he was debating with himself whether he should not reveal his true name and leave a message behind him in case he died, for Ada and his cousin Ralph. Ever since he left Bodelford, now nearly 4 years ago, he had been known by the name of John Robinson. He'd never meant it to be permanent, and yet the time had never come when he could conveniently throw aside his incognito and stand forth in his true name. On the other hand, what did it matter? He had no relative in the world save Ralph, and he very much questioned whether he cared whether he were alive or dead. And as for Ada, he did not see how she could be benefited by hearing the truth, supposing he were to die. If he fell a victim to this fever, he might as well die John Robinson and be forgotten. And if he lived, well, he had resolved long since to take a trip to Esbrig in early autumn and make inquiries, and if Ada was still single, he would make himself known and plead his love once more, and if she were married, he would return again to his work and bear his cross as patiently as he could, and try to do his duty. While these thoughts were passing through his mind, Nick Whiffle came and stood by his side. "Yon's a bonny sky, Gaffer," he said, looking steadily at the glowing west. "Yes, it's very beautiful," Jack answered. "Do you think there's aught behind all that glory and gold? Any better country where there is no fever, nor trouble, nor sin? Where the little childer be all happy, and the bigger people all good?" "Yes, Nick, I believe there is." "Well, I'm mighty glad to hear you say that, though I don't know as it much matters, for I guess it ain't for such rock as me." Jack looked up at the giant with one of his old, winsome smiles, and answered, "I guess it's for everybody, Nick, that trusts in the Lord Jesus and tries to do his duty." "Well now," said Nick with a smile, "you've always the knack of saying things purty, and putting the best side out, and yet I never knowed you to deceive any of us." Jack smiled again and answered, "I should gain nothing by trying to deceive you, or anyone, and what I said I meant. The book tells us that the good God loves us all, and that the Lord Jesus died for everybody. Nothing can be plainer than that. No, seems pretty square speaking, Nick answered, while a dreamy, far-away look came into his eyes, as though he saw something far away beyond the sunset. For a while, neither spoke, and the evening quiet remained unbroken, save for the song of a thrush far up the hillside, and an occasional moan from the sufferers within. I hope poor Joe and the rest of 'em are better off, Nick spoke at length. But Joe Pierce were like a brother to me. I wish the Lord had spared him. The Lord knows best, Jack answered reverently. And Joe seemed especially glad to go. He was afraid if he got well, he might go back again to old ways. Now, at least, he's safe. Aye, Gaffer, you're right in that. I wish I were as safe as he. And if I were ready, I wouldn't mind going too. Must be mighty pretty away yonder. And Nick pointed with his large forefinger to where the few clouds were glowing in the amber light. Jack lifted his eyes to the sunset sky, but did not speak. But Nick was surprised a few minutes later at hearing him sing in a sweet tenor voice a verse of an old hymn that he had often heard his mother sing. No chilling wind or poisonous breath can reach that healthful shore. Sickness and sorrow, pain and death are felt and feared no more. The sufferers heard the song also, and lifted their heads to listen. It was as though an angel had come down and was chanting a song of paradise, while Nick brushed his large hand across his eyes and soon, as the singing ceased, turned without a word and entered one of the cabins. Chapter 29. Beyond the Sunset. On the following day, Nick Whiffle was smitten down with the fever, and for 18 days and nights Jack nursed him almost without intermission. And then, with his head upon Jack's shoulder, the kindly-spirited giant breathed out his soul into the hands of God. No sufferer ever more truly deserved the name of patient than he. Never a murmur escaped his lips. Day after day he lay writhing in agony, growing weaker and weaker all the while. Yet he uttered no complaint, nor ever seemed to trouble about himself. From the first, he believed that he would not get better, and was quite reconciled to his fate. He had fastened upon the simple truths of the gospel and had hidden them in his heart. And when once he had apprehended their meaning, all doubt and fear vanished, and he lay, day after day, waiting for the coming of the angel that should unlock the beautiful sunset gates and let him through into the light and beauty of the better life. For Jack, he always had a smile of welcome, and yet he was ever afraid that he was receiving more attention than was his due, or that Jack was giving himself unnecessary trouble. "I like to have you near," he would say, "but you mustn't wear yourself out for me. I'll be all right. It's a longish tunnel, this, but I'll be out into the daylight by and by." "You're not sorry you gave up your work to nurse the sick?" Jack said to him one day. "Oh, no," he answered with a smile. "I'm very glad. I think it's about the best bit of work I ever done." "Well, perhaps it is, but you'll do other good work when you're better." Nick smiled again, and then answered, "No, Gaffer, you're wrong. I finished my contract. The day's nearly up. I'm waiting for the bell to ring, and I shall go to sleep and wake up in a better country nor this." "Do you really think you'll not get better?" Jack asked in some surprise. "Aye, I'm quite sure of it," was the answer. "I knowed it from the first." "Nonsense," said Jack cheerfully. "That's mere fancy. You have a splendid constitution, and you are almost certain to pull through." "You may think so, Gaffer, but I knows better. I knowed what was coming the evening when I spoke to you outside." "You didn't mention it," Jack said. "No, but it were in my heart. The little verse you sang has been ringing like a bell inside me ever since." "I wish you'd sing it again, if it ain't too much trouble." I've quite forgotten what it was," Jack answered. "Well, I can't put it together straight, but it were about the sickness never coming, the sorrow all ended, and the fever never rising from the swamps." "Oh, I know," said Jack, and sitting by his dying mate, he sang the verse again and again. And later in the day 3 of the nurses joined him, and they sang together the hymn beginning, there is a land of pure delight from the first verse to the last. While Nick listened as though entranced, and forgot all about his weakness and pain as the plaintive strains floated about him. As the days passed on, Jack became of Nick's opinion. The giant's strength was evidently failing fast, and it became abundantly clear to those who waited upon him that his days were numbered. He was soon too weak to speak except in the faintest whisper. But with wistful eyes he followed Jack about the room as though eager not to lose sight of him for a moment. Jack easily interpreted the giant's look, and kept near him all the while, now moistening his parched lips, and now laying damp cloths upon his scorching brow. And when the poor fellow could no longer speak, he would smile his thanks. He seemed perfectly content, and never once through all his illness expressed a desire to get better. The hope of a beautiful home beyond the sunset seemed to fill all his life, and when in his delirium he rambled in his speech, it was only to talk about his mother and the bright country where pain and fever would never come. A few hours before he died, he seemed suddenly to recover his strength, and spoke again in his old tone of voice. But Jack had witnessed the same symptoms in more than one of the poor fellows that had died, and so was not deceived thereby. "I'm nearly through the tunnel, Gaffer," Nick said. "It's been very tough and hard, but I'm nearly through. The light is beginning to glimmer, and I'll soon be on the other side. You've been very good to me, Gaffer, and I never loved a fellow like I love you. You fought me fair and clean, and licked me straight, and I loved you ever since. We'll meet again, above, where the clouds burn red, and iron or even the larks get to sing. Mother's waiting for me. I seen her in a dream last night. I know I'm going. I've seen the others go. Hark, that's the clock, beginning to strike." And the poor fellow paused with a bewildered air, and looked strangely round the room. "Hold my hand, mate," he said after a pause, "for it's getting very dark again." And Jack took the giant's hand, and he held it with a firm and steady grip. For a while no other word was spoken, but Jack saw that even now the poor fellow was at the fording of the river. "You'll not forget me altogether?" Nick whispered at length. "No, Nick, I'll never forget you," Jack answered. "Will you ask the Lord Jesus to hold me tight?" he said. "I'm getting very weak." And scarcely had the words escaped his lips when his head fell heavy against Jack's arm, and without a moan he passed away into the silent land where the wicked cease from troubling and the weary are at rest. For a week before Nick died, there had been no fresh case of fever, and everyone began to hope that the dread epidemic had run its course and spent all its strength. Hence, great was the regret when 2 days after, Jack himself was smitten down with all the worst symptoms of the disease. It was just what he had all along expected, and so was quite prepared for it. Nor was he at all concerned about the issue. He felt that he was in the hands of God, and what he willed was best. He noted the troubled look on the doctor's face without alarm. He knew he had been weakened by long and constant watching by the bedside of others, and that, as a consequence, he was not so well able to battle with the disease as he would otherwise have been. But the reflection did not trouble him. He had tried to do his duty, and was content to abide by the result. The only thing that troubled him was his incognito. Should he take someone, the doctor, for instance, into his confidence, and explain to him who he was and where he came from? Or should he still retain his disguise, and if he died, be buried with the name of John Robinson upon his coffin? It was a difficult question to decide. Had he brothers and sisters living, his duty would be clear indeed. He would have informed them of his whereabouts long ago. But being an orphan and alone, he was at a loss to know what to do for the best. He was debating the question with himself one afternoon when the doctor entered. "Well, Robinson, how are you today?" the doctor asked in cheery tones. "About the same, thank you," Jack said feebly. "The fever seems to be running its usual course." "You're getting down in the dumps, I fear," the doctor said. "It will never do to let your spirits flag. We must keep you interested in life, and in the world if we can." Jack smiled feebly, but did not answer. "Well, come, listen to this, and you will learn how the world is interested in you." "In me?" said Jack in a tone of surprise. "Aye, in you. Why, the Bradford Mercury devotes nearly a column to your doings, and in praise of your heroism." "Now you're making fun of me." "Nay, I am not. I was never more serious in my life. Yesterday's issue contains a long article headed Heroism of Everyday Life, in which, my friend, you come in for the lion's share of the praise." "Then don't read it to me," said Jack. "I would rather not hear it." "Well, then, I'll leave the paper, and you'll be able to read it for yourself at your leisure." "I fear that will be a long time first, Doctor. I'm too weak to read, almost to think." "No, nonsense," said the doctor, laying his fingers upon his wrist. "You've got a lot of vitality yet." "And I shall need it all," said Jack, with a feeble smile. "Well, keep your heart up, at any rate, and I will run over again tomorrow." And the next moment he was gone. Before the day was over, Jack's curiosity got the better of him, and he took occasional glances at the newspaper that was lying on his bed. and though he had not strength to read it all, he was able to gather its drift. "I didn't think I was such a hero," he said to himself with a wintry smile. "And for myself, I do not care for such praise. And yet, I would like Ada to see this, and know that it referred to me, but then she may be married by this, and perhaps has quite forgotten me. And if I reveal my name now, people will say it was all through vanity and pride. I think I'd better keep my secret still." When the doctor called on the following day, he was quite delirious, and so the secret remained undisclosed. "I fear he will not pull through," the doctor said as he stood talking with the nurse for a few minutes outside the door. "His strength was quite exhausted to start with." "Such a death is very sad," said the nurse, "and yet very glorious. It is strange no one can find out anything relative to his antecedents," said the doctor. "He is evidently well born. Yes, he is a gentleman in every sense, but about the past he's silent. Even in his delirium he betrays nothing." "It is strange," said the doctor, mounting his horse. "Very strange." Then, raising his hat, he galloped away. And that is where we will leave it for today, with poor Jack lying sick with fever at death's door. I wonder what will become of him. I suppose we will have to wait and find out together on the next Soft Stories. I'll see you then.